This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 80 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you believe that, folks? 80 episodes of us journeying together towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And folks, I am just so thankful that you have found this podcast, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Homestead Journey. Without further ado, let's hop right on over to this week's Homestead happenings, and I will bring you up to speed with what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. This week on our homestead, something non-homesteading related happened, but it is one of those major milestones in life. And I thought that I would go ahead and share it with you. And that is that our son got his driver's license. And folks, those of you who have been through that know that life changes. It is amazing the level of anxiety that one can feel when your son drives off, and then you remember back to how you drove at that age. So, but he is a very, very careful driver, and I was very thankful that he did pass on the first try. And so that was a major milestone this week. We actually spent a little bit of time in the evenings just getting him prepared to do the 3-point turns and parallel parking and just get comfortable with some of the routes that they might take in town. And so anyhow, that was a big deal here for our family this week. It was a relatively chilly week this year on the homestead. And so I did not do a lot of things outdoors on the homestead this week. In fact, there were a couple evenings when I went out to try to do things, and the wind was so strong and it was so chilly that I tapped out as a wimp. Our lawnmower, I was able to get it to start. I needed to go get a new battery in order for it to do that. But once I was able to get it started, I was not able to get it to drive, to move at all. And I went out a couple of evenings to try a few different things that I'd found on the web with regards to potentially having to bleed the hydrostatic system. And it was just so miserable and so chilly that it took me a couple of evenings to even work my way through the instructions. And then once I did, it didn't work. And it was kind of brutal. I'm just a wimp, I guess. It is funny though, how once you've been spoiled by some summer-like weather, how all of a sudden things that felt warm maybe a month and a half ago, now all of a sudden feel rather chilly. The way our bodies adjust to weather, it's kind of bizarre like that. I always jokingly say it's amazing how warm 35 degrees feels in March as to how chilly it feels in October. And there is a lot of truth to be said about that. But anyhow, it was a chilly week here on the homestead, and that ended up allowing me the opportunity, where I didn't feel guilty for not being outdoors doing things, to prepare for the upcoming Homestead Journey Challenge that is going to take place this coming week. So starting tomorrow, April 26th, I'm recording this on Sunday, April 25th. And so starting tomorrow on April 26th, we're going to be doing our first ever Homestead Journey Challenge. And so I am so excited about that. And so this week I did spend a number of evenings working on worksheets for that and slides for that, and just getting prepared for this week's upcoming challenge. I'm so excited about it, and I hope that you have gotten signed up for it. If you're listening to this far into the future, obviously it's going to be a little late for you to get signed up. But if you are listening to this the day that it drops, or even the day after this comes out, definitely go ahead and sign up for the Homestead Journey Challenge. And I think that you will, at least I hope that it will be well worth your time. Yesterday, it did warm up a little bit here on the homestead. And so I did spend quite a bit of time outdoors getting ready to put our meat chickens out on pasture. Now, I was hoping to do that today, but it's supposed to get down into the low 30s tomorrow evening. And so I've opted to hold off until Tuesday. And starting on Tuesday, it looks like we're going to be back up into 60s during the day and low to mid 40s at night. And so I'm just going to feel a little bit more comfortable putting the meat birds out in those conditions rather than when it's supposed to get down into the low 30s and maybe even into the upper 20s. I did pull out the hoop coop that we use for this. It is based on the design by Off Grid with Doug and Stacy. I think they call it their $50 chicken tractor or something like that. And we have used that thing for meat birds. We used it for turkeys. We've used it as a pig shelter for young pigs. It's just an absolute versatile design, and we have been very, very happy with it. And so I got that pulled out of the pig area where I had been using that for some pig housing and put a new tarp on it. And then I set up the Premier One fencing around that area yesterday. And so we are all ready to go on Tuesday with the meat birds. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and this will really roll over into this week's charting the course, but yesterday I also took a crack at my least favorite chore of all time here on the homestead, and that is pig castration. So as you may remember, we have 2 litters on the ground here right now on the farm. One was born on a Monday, and unfortunately, only one of those piglets survived. And then a few days later, the other sow farrowed, and 6 of those have survived. So right now I have a total of 7 piglets in with 2 sows. The first piglet, I went ahead and notched its ears right away. And the other piglets, well, I didn't get around to notching their ears as early as I normally would have. So yesterday we went ahead and notched their ears. We went ahead and tagged them. And then I was going to castrate the males. But what I realized when I went to castrate the males is that I forgot to reorder the scalpels that I use when I do the castration. Now, some people will use razor blades and other people will use knives. I don't like to use razor blades because I'm just afraid that if I slip, I could cut myself, cut who's ever holding the pig, or maybe even cut the pig itself. It just doesn't give me as much control as I would like. I'm not a professional doing this. So that's why I don't really care for razor blades. And then knives, I just don't really have knives that are sharp enough to do that. There's a type of scalpel that I usually use that I order on Amazon, and I had run out of those last year. And like I said, I forgot to reorder them. So I thought, no big deal. I'll run over to Tractor Supply and pick up a packet of their scalpels. Well, folks, that was absolutely a waste of $4.99. Those scalpels were dull, absolutely duller than a hoe. I would have had to press down so hard to make the incisions. It's already a horrible job. And then to have to do something like that, to me, I just couldn't do it. So I said, you know what? I'm tapping out. I'll order those other scalpels from Amazon. And then when they arrive, I'll be able to do this in the least sucky way possible. Folks, I absolutely hate this job. I really do. I hate pig castration, but it's something that's necessary. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in this week's charting the course. But I will go ahead and put a link in the show notes to the scalpels that I recommend, as well as I will add those to our list of recommended gear over on the homesteadjourney.net/shop. So if you are interested in buying decent scalpels and not the junk that they sell at Tractor Supply, definitely look for those links. We've had great success with those scalpels. I guess as good of success as you can have doing this chore. Oh, and I hate it, folks. Have I said that I hate it? But I do. But anyhow, go ahead and check out those links. Those are definitely a much better option, in my opinion, than the junk from Tractor supply. All right, that's what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. I hope things are well wherever you are at, and definitely looking forward to this week's upcoming challenge. So if you haven't signed up for it and you still can, do so. I don't think you will be disappointed. Before we head on over to this week's Charting the Course, I did want to remind you that if you are interested in supporting the show, you can do so in a number of different ways. First of all, you can simply support the show by sharing it with other people. Share it with friends, family, people that you think might find it interesting, and I would greatly appreciate that. Secondly, you can support the show by leaving it a review or a rating. That does help other people find the show. And then finally, if you want to support the show financially, head on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/shop. And there you will find a list of affiliate links to products that we not only use here on our homestead, but products that we recommend. And in fact, as I said, those scalpels that we use and like will be listed there. So definitely head on over there and check that out as well. All right, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. Just about every time that I post on Instagram or Facebook that we had notched ears and tagged piglets and then castrated piglets, I always get a lot of questions as to why we do what we do. And so I thought that I would go ahead and put together this episode just to share with you the rationale behind why we do what we do. Because these things, I think for some people are a bit controversial. There are some people that would look at it as potentially, I guess, cruelty to animals because you are inflicting pain on the animal. In some cases with the ear notching and the ear tagging, probably marginally, it's kind of akin to getting your ears pierced. But then obviously with the castration, it's something that's certainly not a very pleasant thing to think about. And it certainly is not a very pleasant thing to do. So let's start with the ear notching and the ear tagging. So why do we notch ears? Well, the simple answer to that is simply for identification purposes. By notching the ears, it allows me to identify the piglet based on the litter that it came from and then the pig number within that litter. So I utilize what's called the universal ear notching system. I'll leave a link to a diagram of how that works. But each notch, in essence, signifies a different number. And as you add up the notches, then that's going to give you the litter number, which you put in the right ear, and then the piglet number, which is what would be in the left ear. So, for example, if a piglet had maybe a notch at the bottom of this earlobe and a notch at the bottom of this earlobe, that would be piglet litter 1, piglet 1. Okay. So actually I've got that backwards because you're right here. So this would be litter 1, piglet 1. If I had 2 notches down here on the right lobe, that would be litter 2, and 1 notch down here would be piglet 1. So definitely check out that, or you can Google the universal ear notching system, but that's how that works. Right ear is litter number, left ear is pig number. Now, when I say identification purposes, this really helps me do a couple of things. First of all, if I have multiple litters on the ground at the same time, it helps me identify which sow is the mother. This is particularly important if you are raising animals with a pedigree. You want to make sure that you are keeping good records of which sow has produced which piglets. But even if you aren't necessarily registering the pigs, you still want to keep track of that, because if there are certain traits that you want to breed for, or maybe potential issues that you've had in the past, then you want to know where, kind of the source of those piglets, to make sure that you don't repeat mistakes that maybe you've had, or you can repeat successes that you've had. So that's really the first reason, is so that it helps you identify the mom and then the piglet itself. Now, some might say, well, why don't you just identify the piglet based on the ear tag? Well, the reason why I don't just rely on the ear tag is because the ear tag is something that you have to wait to be able to put into the pigs. When they're first born, they simply cannot handle having the ear tag put into their ear. Their ear just isn't big enough to handle it. And so I like to evaluate the piglets as early as possible. I want to evaluate them for temperament. I want to evaluate them for conformation. And the only way that I can do that and keep them straight is by notching the ears. If I were to wait for the ear tag, then I might get mixed up who had 12 teats, who had 14 teats, who was chill, who wasn't chill, and some of the other things that I am looking for in my piglets. But not just that, at times ear tags get ripped out. My boar's ear tag, original ear tag, was ripped out of his ear. I don't know how that happened, but he no longer has the ear tag that he came with. But by having notches, now you know that this pig is who you think it is. In the case of my boar, I only have one boar. Well, I have two boars now, but at that point, I only had one boar. He's since been retagged for another purpose. But if you had multiple sows, then at that point, it might get very confusing if you had the ear tag ripped out and you don't have the notches to back it up. Another way that ear notches are helpful, and we had this happen with the American Guinea Hog Association, is there was a pig who had kind of been lost, so to speak. He had been sold on multiple times, but he had a pedigree that was very important for breed recovery. And so because of the ear notches, they were able to positively identify that pig and be able to bring him back into the herd book. And so now his genetics are not going to be lost forever, but we are able to breed him and recover some of those genetics and return them to the breed. So ear notching, really, when it all boils down to it, it's simply for identification purposes, but there's just a number of reasons why those identification purposes are important to breeders. Now, moving on to the tags. Why do we use tags and not just rely on ear notches? Well, the ear notches are going to help a particular farm identify the litters that it has, and that farmer is going to know which sow and which boar were paired together to create that litter. But that doesn't help farm B know what happened on farm A. And it doesn't help identify positively that this pig came from farm A because the ear notches, you only have two ears, so it's litter and it's piglet. There's no place for me to notch to say it came from this farm. And so a tag can have, it doesn't always, but a tag can have what's called a premise ID. A premise ID is assigned by the Department of Agriculture, the United States Department of Agriculture. And so it helps identify the premise on which that pig was born. This is helpful for registration purposes. It's also helpful for the purposes of being able to move swine across state lines. Legally, to move swine across state lines, they're supposed to have an 840 tag in them with a premise ID. We could get into some of the concerns of having government involvement in some of these things, and I certainly do share some of those concerns, but that's not what this episode is about. We could talk about that on a future episode, but it is very important from a legal perspective that when you go across state lines, that you are following the laws in place. Some states do require vet inspections, but the Department of Agriculture does technically require an 840 tag if you are going to move pigs across state lines. In part, this is simply to be able to track swine-borne diseases. So if there's an outbreak, as there was a number of years ago here in New York State with regards to brucellosis, they can more easily track back to the source of that with a premise ID. So our tag has our premise ID in it, and then it has a number that corresponds to that pig. I think it's like a 9-digit number. The first part of it is the premise ID, and then the last part of it is the piglet number. The premise ID is unique to that farm. And so again, that's really what that is used for. You can also use the tags in a number of different ways to signify whether or not it's a male or a female or a cut male. Some people do this by tagging particular ears. So some people use the phrase right for Romeos, so right for males, left for the ladies. So anything that's tagged on the right ear would be a male or a cut male, and anything tagged in the left ear would be a female. I prefer to use color coding. So all of mine get tagged in the right ear, and I utilize green for cut males, blue for intact males, and then pink for girls. It's just a way that from a distance, then I can quickly identify which pigs are which. And this really does help me to a certain extent ensure that pigs are where they're supposed to be. If I see a blue tag in the middle of a bunch of pink tags, I know I'm in trouble. But no, from a distance, it really does help you determine that simple thing. If pink, it's a girl. If it's a green, it's a cut male. And if it's blue, it's an intact male. So again, ear notching and ear tagging, really, it's all about identifying the pig, the litter that pig came from. And it really, as a herdsman, it helps you really keep track of good genetics, bad genetics, good pairings between a boar and a sow, and maybe a pairing that doesn't necessarily produce as good of an outcome as what you would like. On to castration, my least favorite topic. And I think for many males, when you start thinking about castration, it kind of does cause you to double over a little bit. But why do we castrate pigs? Well, there's really two reasons why I castrate pigs here on my homestead. The first is simple herd management. I want to ensure that I have control over any breeding that takes place. And so if I weren't going to castrate, then what I would have to do is keep all of the boys together and all of the girls together. And then that just becomes a lot more complicated for me, ensuring that we don't have purple, if you know what I mean. That we don't have boys getting in with the girls and girls getting in with the boys. I already have problems with that, having had just one boar on my farm for many years. And now that I have two boars, I've got twice the opportunity of pigs getting where they're not supposed to be. But imagine that if I had not cut my males. Right now, I have 2 cut barrows in with all of the girls over in the large pig paddock. And I also have 3 that I'm going to cut in with the litter right now. My possibility of having unplanned pregnancies would in essence skyrocket by having 7 boars on the farm instead of just 2. But it's also more complicated than just that. The boys will fight each other, and they will fight each other to the death. And so I want to make sure that I am avoiding those kinds of things. Generally speaking, that's more of an issue when you introduce an unknown boar into your herd or sounder, but it can happen when you have a bunch of males put together. So to avoid that situation and to avoid unplanned pregnancies, I opt to castrate. But there's also something that's called boar taint. Boar taint is something that not everybody is sensitive to. I think they estimate 25 to 30% of the population is actually sensitive to boar taint. If you are sensitive to boar taint, though, boar taint is an off smell and taste that happens generally in the fat, but with uncut males due to the hormones they have. People who are sensitive to it say that it smells like cat urine. And I don't find cat urine to be very pleasant in smell. So to avoid potential boar taint, That's another reason why I castrate. Now, some people have selectively bred their American guinea hogs to really reduce the level of taint that is possible. Some people will simply harvest the uncut males earlier to avoid boar taint. So they might harvest them as suckling pigs or as small roasters. But for me, I prefer to cut those males, and then it gives me an option of being able to sell the pigs off of my farm so that other people can raise them out. And that gives them an experience with quality stock. And hopefully in the future, they may decide that they want to raise registered American guinea hogs as well. And so that's another reason why I opt to castrate my piglets. Now, some people will say, well, why don't you ban piglets like you banned calves? And the reason why we don't do that is simply a matter of anatomy. The way that a pig is shaped, the testicles don't hang down far enough in order for banding to work consistently. And so the best way to do it, if you're going to ensure that the males can't breed and you don't have boar taint, is to cut them and to pop the testicle out. And it's just a horrible, horrible thing. But if you do it right, they get over it very, very quickly. But it still doesn't make it that much more of a pleasant task. Now, other people will say, well, why don't you bring a vet in and have a vet do it? The reason why I don't do that simply boils down to cost. For me, to have a vet come to my farm is a $200 charge just to have them visit. And then it's a $75 per hour charge for them to be here on my farm. So let's say that I was going to have them do 3 piglets. They probably are going to be able to do 3 piglets in under an hour. I've never had them come do it, but my guess is a vet that knows what they're doing is probably going to be able to do it in under an hour. But let's just say that it ends up costing me $275 to have them come out and to go ahead and cut those pigs. I sell my feeder pigs right now for $100 each. So at that point, I'm not making any money whatsoever off of my feeder pigs just to cover the vet bill. So it doesn't make financial sense for me to have a vet come out and do it. And what if I only had 1 piglet that needed to be cut? Now it's costing me $275 for a pig that I can only sell for $100. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever financially to have a vet come out and do it. And so that's why I opt to do it myself. And we try to make it as quick as possible. I try to make sure I have the right equipment for the job, which is why I tapped out this week and opted not to use the dull, worthless, junky scalpels from Tractor Supply. Don't waste your $4.99, people. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Head on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/shop and look for a listing for good scalpels. But I want to make sure that I do right by the pigs. I want to make sure that I do it in a way that is as quick and as painless as possible, understanding there still is some pain that's involved and it just absolutely sucks. But there's a reason why we do what we do. And if I weren't doing that, it would certainly make it more difficult for someone like me on a smaller scale to be able to raise pigs. Because I just don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to have the males and the females separated in a way that I could be ensured that there's going to be no purple, to ensure that there's not going to be any fighting to the death, to ensure that I don't put myself or my family in a dangerous situation. And so for those reasons, that's why we opt to castrate. I understand why some people don't like it. I understand why some people don't do it. I get all of that, but that's the reason why we castrate here on 3B Farm and Homestead. So hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you found this informative. If you have any questions about what I've shared, please reach out to me, Brian at thehomesteadjourney.net. and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that I may have missed. So that's it for this week's episode, folks. I'm looking forward to this week's upcoming challenge. And so I will provide you with a full report on how that goes next week. As usual, the music on today's episode was provided by audionautics.com. So a big shout out to them. And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.